You have arrived at the end, absolute spirits. And for those that are just joining us, the end is just the beginning. Today's session is number 38, Uniting the Genuine Philosophers of the World in a Higher Spirit. If you are new, this is going to be a bit overwhelming. We covered a lot, and I'm very proud of what happened here because we kept it scholarly, but broad enough to encompass a lot of what's going on in our world today. But to catch you up, I'm going to try and perform a miraculous feat and summarize all 37 sessions before this one in about 2 to 3 minutes. And if I go over, just bear with me. It's a lot. So, okay, let's begin. In the first session of Spirit, we talked about Hegel being the greatest and most ultimate philosopher up to this point in human history, because genuine philosophy kind of stopped with him as the synthesizing or sublating of 115 tremendous minds in 3,000 years of human wisdom. For the last 200 years, no one has been able to comprehend this completely because of one-sidedness. Number 3 is that when you do grasp him on all sides, he becomes metaphysical and empirical, and allows you to release your spirit in a practical spirit to change the world, which is what we're doing now with these sessions. Number 4 is that you get beyond his stereotypes by grasping the first negation. To 5, grasp his circle of reason, which sounds religious at the end. And number 6, we say that actually genuine philosophy is the sublation religion, not the absolute negation. Because number 7, there's the universal logic that we're going to put into modern notation to win the Nobel Peace Prize in the first million. To 8, where 8, we start this universal logic with polemics, but number 9, the second negation is sublation of that polemic, as the polemic of polemics. Number 10 is that Hegel provides a masterclass in refutation in philosophy called the science of logic, which is sublation over and over again. Number 11 is that this masterclass is a realm of the ineffable speaking itself. It's what we have been trying to put into words but couldn't for 3,000 years and more. Number 12 is that the purpose of life is to live this logic. To number 13, free everybody's spirit because we're all infinitely valuable. To 14, experience this profound immanent connection to God, which number 15, atheistically can be said as the science of sciences and connection to your deepest truth as yourself that you can know. Number 16 is that all of our gurus have been doing this for thousands of years as the science of logic implicit. Number 17 is that this mysticism that used to be superstitious is now becoming scientific mysticism as speculative thought to grasp the true power of now. Number 18 is that the limit of our dialectical reason is the limit of our fun, games, and flow state, which 19, an ideal philosopher uses laughter to perform the polemics and make their points more cogently. To 20, synthesize all philosophies into one in this peaceful process, which 22, overcomes evil as ignorance with our wisdom quiz, which 21, now we're 22, can help us harness the power of our disruptive technologies like CRISPR with this kind of universal wisdom. To 23, have a more developed logic concretely with the synchronicity document of philosophies. To 24, release this new world spirit in between each other in an interpersonal practical way. To 25, sublate even communities of people, such as, particular examples of religious communities today. We sublated them all, or the main ones. 26, we did the opposite and sublated the existentialists. To 27, sublate our entire economic paradigm of socialism, capitalism, communism to overcome our global existential crisis. To 28, also sublate the atheistic religions such as Buddhism to also get transcendent of, or to transcend absolute atheism with absolute logic. To 30, realize that we are part of this process imminently. We are the biggest sublation of all. 31 is that our language is objective, not just subjective. We talked about Wittgenstein there. To 32, grasp the trickiness of it as the dialectic and the speculative nature to overcome horror and double binds. 33 then was about overcoming not just our individual double binds in our individual minds, but also do it collectively and repair the damage of double binds of the past, of colonialism and imperialism, and to not repeat that mistake. 34 was about how we finally arrive at the true soil of philosophy. We break out of that sort of sensuousness and those pains of the past with Descartes and transcending him to enter philosophy for the first time. To 35, use this philosophy to sort of grasp the genuine reason. This universal logic really is the thing that we need, no matter whether we steer the ship with democracy or dictators, benevolent dictatorships. To 36, become unforgettable agents of history with this new scientific coherent and correspondent proof of God, or the truth of ourselves, our higher spirit. And then 37, we showed a strategic way that we're going to do this in our practical reality in our current epoch by gaining one of the highest senses of recognition from the 5 Nobel Prizes, winning them all in this universal form of reason. So that was a little bit longer than normal, but I hope to have done a good job to arrive us at this session today. And the title, of course, is Yes, 38 SOS, where SOS stands for Sessions of Spirit, but it also stands for Save Our Souls. It's a turn of phrase, whether you're atheistic or theistic. It just means that real philosophy, genuine philosophy, the type that Hegel is talking about as the greatest philosopher currently of all time, is supposed to be practical in its spirit, not just theoretical. And this is what releases the free spirit, which is what we're going to do today to unite the genuine philosophers of the world. I'm ending this session with a picture of a quote from Hegel. And it's a bit cosmic, it's a bit mystical, but it's also scientific. There's the space in the background, astronomy, some of the greatest triumphs of modern science, all in one picture. And the quote goes like this: "For the nature of humanity is to impel men and women and beyond to agree with one another, and its very existence lies simply in the explicit realization of a community of conscious life." That's what these sessions of spirit are hopefully galvanizing in all its particular ways and forms. Hegel was a profound believer in an essence of unity in an infinite diversity. So today's summary paragraph says a lot in a very small space. This is what we can do when we see clearly as genuine philosophers. It goes like this: "In order to usher in the new world spirit with a seismic wave of inspiration and goodness, we must unite the genuine philosophers of the world who will work in this one wisdom and forge the tremendous insight of Hegel into their being and thinking. We must preserve through the most disciplined mental tarrying with the dialectic and face all our horrors in a true test of spirit. Hegel will test you, but have faith that what he is saying is rational, and although not yet perfect as he himself claims, he is yet amongst the stars for missing the moon, and we must meet him there. First, by clarifying who we are, the definition of genuine philosophy and the essence of the philosopher as pure thought. Secondly, as willing these truths into the world universally, with compassion, with love, and with a spirit of sublation. Thirdly, as the ideal whole of which we will all enjoy and flow as genuinely free spirit in our destiny as absolute and complete blessedness." I hope that sent tingles through the people who need it. Words can be powerful when they speak to the universal. But let's unpack it. Let's get into the details and determine if this is wisdom or not. We're allowed to know it. So the dialectical unfolding starts where we began or where we left off last time. In the last session, we spoke about strategy needing to be absolutely coherent if we're not going to be naive. We have a plan. We know what we want to do. We want to unite the philosophers of the world. We want to have wisdom. We have a new culture that creates more harmony. We've been saying this for thousands of years, and it hasn't happened completely yet. But we are making progress. We have a plan, but we need a strategy to achieve that plan with wisdom and actually come to this completion. The strategy needs to include the single greatest missing piece of current human culture, of current philosophy across 200 countries and 7,000 languages or more in our current epoch. And that universally logical concept is this word sublation. Very unfamiliar, but we're speaking about it all the time. And we gave an example of it in yesterday and the day before last session with Harvard, in that the greatest minds are speaking at the highest levels in sublation, but they don't realize it. We are making that realization explicit so we can make it a part of our practical will. What is implicit in us can be in our being, and we can move in faith and intuition with it, but we can't really know it to use it with our conscious minds. You have to flow with it like an artist. You can channel it like a theologian, a religious scholar. a divine one. But as genuine philosophers, we're doing all of it now as self-determining spirit, which can know it through faith and intuition and bring it thinkingly into our conscious power. And we mapped out a bit of a strategy, but today we're going to continue that a little bit and bring it to concretion and hopefully end up in a place that we can start acting upon quickly and efficaciously and wisely. One thing we have to do, first of all, is as we bring Hegel into our current time, we have to start sublating the biggest divides of all on the nature of his philosophy itself, between the left and the right Hegelians. This split happened as soon as Hegel died. They did exactly what he didn't want them to do, and philosophy split and wasn't able to reconcile itself for the last 200 years. Today, we don't have real philosophy, we have abstract philosophy. He brings in concrete, genuine philosophy, which is this infinite kind of thinking. And what we used that philosophy for in the last couple of sessions was to do something incredible, was to repeat what Hegel really said in his true, speculative, amazing freedom of mind. And that's that we were able to prove the existence of God ontologically in a way that doesn't repeat the mistakes of the past. And some of the other great minds were approximating this universal logic, but they weren't clear enough to do it in a way that didn't have these easy contradictions to refute, like which was what Kant did to Anselm and all these other proofs. If you think deeply and you have the right order, the right logical order, we can retrace Hegel's steps and show how he says to do it. And it's quite profound. We have to prove the existence and the object in the supersensuous realm of pure thought. A thought realm that we don't leave ambiguous as the Lord anymore. We can know it determinately as absolute spirit or as absolute scientists, to say that secularly and religiously. This is going to unite those left and right Hegelians because we're talking about the same essence, the same existence that we're wrapped up in at the same time using different words. But Hegel shows us that through our ordinary words, we can actually put them in this right order that satisfies this sort of divine absolute knowing that we want, that pushes us forward to seek wisdom as philosophers. So we did this not only through a coherence model of truth, but also through correspondence, because Hegel wasn't just either an empiricist or I guess a supersensualist, an a priori sort of metaphysician. He was both of them because he sublated all these opposites. He was more metaphysical than metaphysician, and more empirical than some of our empiricists today. That's why he's relevant. But we are going to take this kind of proof and this deeper way of thinking, and we're going to bring it to the world. We're going to have to take it initially to the people who are open to these kinds of proofs, which will be our sort of absolute atheists, the ones that are really not operating out of anger. There's a lot of abstract atheism going on where it's not really, they haven't broken out of the condition of their opposite, which is the theist. The theist in some way control the negative moment of the atheist, because the atheist is the second moment of logic that we talked about in universal logic. Sounds really incredible, but literally everything that is rational has to have three sides to it, according to Hegel. It's this living syllogism, where the first is abstract understanding, the second is this dialectical negative moment, which is a sort of resistance to the first. But in that resistance, it determines the indeterminate nature, the common sense unquestioning of this truth. And it pulls it out and finds an internal contradiction that eventually raises to a new universal, a new truth. That's what atheism and theism is in right now, is in this affirmative and negative. So if the absolute atheist wants to break free, they have to understand the contradictions of their negative position and achieve something affirmative, which satisfies both of them. That's the higher truth. And we're going to bring it to both of them because the true seekers are open to it, as whether they're atheists or if they are seeking God as the theists. And right now, luckily, there's 2.5 billion, at least 2.5, 3 billion theists who are searching, maybe some of them more than others. But we also have true scientists as well, atheist secularists, who are giving their heart, minds, and souls to this seeking of wisdom. And so we have a huge foundation to kind of build upon already, because human beings are within themselves driven to self-actualization. We want to know. One of the greatest principles of philosophy is to know thyself. That's where it comes from. And we do have, even though it looks like we can be pejorative and pessimistic about our species, we actually have a huge amount to work with. We are progressing, and we are in the most rational and technically the most peaceful time in human history, even after surviving a global pandemic. And there's still tremendous amounts of suffering. That's why we're going to be moving at a as quick and as wise a speed as we possibly can, because in a way we are imminently connected in this process of self-recognition with those that have not had the sort of benefits that those in the developed nations do. And even in developed nations, there's people who have been traumatized by this system, and we will come for them as well. Nobody gets left behind. So how are we going to do this quickly and efficaciously and wisely? We have a new disruptive technology. We are in the age of exponentials. All of our stuff, all that modern rationality, all that 3,000 and more years of wisdom building has led to is this sort of hockey stick where our particular knowledge is starting to become godly in many ways. CRISPR, artificial intelligence, is starting to mimic our intelligence. These things we thought were impossible are becoming possible. We found gravity waves. We can do warp drive. It could be like Star Trek now. We can literally bend space-time. This is stuff that used to be science fiction, but the truth is stranger than fiction. And Hegel is just the beginning of showing that from the philosophical perspective. When you get into him, all these ordinary words are tremendously profound. But the most disruptive technology of all is, of course, a technology and a disruption that is no disruption. We are disrupting the chaos in our societies, the remaining chaos, with harmony. And so it's a disruption that is no disruption. It's a concurrence in coherent corresponding concrescence. Maybe there's some white headings that will like that. But there's a comment I leave you to go check out Sessions of Spirit 31, where we talk about Wittgenstein and the language games and why this sophist sounding language, this mind gamey stuff, actually is the true nature of reality. But you have to grasp the right order to break out of these kind of koans, these contradictions and paradoxes that don't seem to make sense. But this kind of language at this point, if you follow the sessions, now makes sense to a genuine philosopher, that when you get close to the truth, you start speaking this way. But inside, we know the order that resolves that, the principle of non-contradiction. And it's through this coherence corresponding concrescence that is Hegel's circular philosophy, that circle of reason that we talked about. This was Hegel's ultimate goal. As a child, he wanted to be a man of letters. He didn't really want to go into the establishment and make a bunch of money. He really sought the truth. And he gave all his life, his early life, till he was 37 years old, just studying, teaching for free, trying to do all this stuff outside the system while having one foot in the system, because he knew that you couldn't just negate it. There was a sublation that he was trying to figure out. And he called this a new Bildung in German. That means a new self-education system, a new self-culture, and something that you can do. And a man of letters was supposed to go from city to city, kind of like Buddha did in a way, and kind of like teach this wisdom and have people realize it for themselves and not be institutionalized, because he was very discontent, as we talked about before, with how religion was happening in this oppressive lordship way, where you needed an external determining. That's why he liked Martin Luther. Martin Luther was the beginning of true philosophy. Well, not true philosophy. It was the beginning of the movement inward that would eventually result in true philosophy. He wanted to take this to its universal and make universities this way, make all of our education this way. And that's how we ended up with the Encyclopedia of the Philosophical Sciences, the total of all knowledge, where he started building that at, interestingly, a high school before he became famous and world spirits started to come through him. We are going to be doing the same thing to make this ontological proof of God in the way he talks about it, and this concrete theory of everything more digestible and knowable to everybody quickly. But a lot of people will say, well, you think you have a system that works, but the mystics of the past show you that every time you think you know something, you get undermined, and it shows you that you know nothing. Well, we do know something now, but the knowing that we have incorporates this backwards thinking that can turn you into your opposite. It's called dialectics. It's called speculative thought. As the truth of that backwards thinking, that twisting, the truth of that is the sublation, the speculative holding of these contradictions in concrete unities in the right order, the science of sciences. So there's a mystic trap that if you don't have that order and you're following intuition, you're following your faith, you see people getting twisted, but you don't know how to articulate it. So there's this, isn't the world already perfect? There is no need to act. In a way, that's true. You just need to realize the right order of things. But what happens to you is what Hegel talks about in this paragraph. He says, while intelligence merely proposes to take the world as it is, will takes steps to make the world what it ought to be. Will looks upon the immediate and given present not as a solid being, but as mere semblance without reality. And I underquote this part. It is here that we meet those contradictions which are so bewildering from the standpoint of abstract morality. This position in its practical bearings is the one taken by the philosophy of Kant and even by that of Fichte. And so what he means here by abstract morality is it's an incomplete morality. There's something about it that turns into its opposite, becomes a contradiction. And it kind of is bewildering, kind of like we use that sort of sophist language above, the distinction that is no distinction. It starts twisting you into these practical contradictions that don't seem to make sense, but you have to have a concrete morality. One of the contradictions he goes on to explain, he says, the good, say these writers, has to be realized. We have to work in order to produce it, and will is only the good actualizing itself. If the world then were as it ought to be, the action of will would be at an end. The will itself, therefore, requires that its end should not be realized. Okay. In these words, a correct expression is given to the finitude of will. So there is a little bit of truth there, right? But here's where Hegel's the most profound. He says, but finitude was not meant to be the ultimate point. And it is the process of will itself which abolishes finitude and the contradiction it involves. The reconciliation it achieved when will in its result returns to the presupposition made by cognition. In other words, it consists in the unity of the theoretical and practical spirit. So right, we're aiming for infinite thought, not this abstract finite thinking. That's that abstract morality that he's talking about. Hegel completes the circle of reason. And he says that, yes, there is a contradiction where when you achieve the good, it kind of ends the point. So it can't be possible, or else we're going to end existence. And he says, will knows the end to be its own. You're wrapped up in this. And intelligence apprehends the world as the notion actual. And the notion is the true understanding of things, the universal, particular, and individual. This is the right attitude of rational cognition. Nullity and transitoriness constitute only the superficial features and not the real essence of the world. That's the emptiness of Buddhism that we talked about before. That essence is the notion in posse and esse, its potential and its actuality. That essence is the science of logic in the supersensuous realm, but also as actualized in the realm of nature, where there's sensuousness and where we are, the realm of finitude. And thus the world is itself the idea. It means it has this completeness to it. This essence completes itself. All unsatisfactory endeavor ceases when we recognize that the final purpose of the world is accomplished no less than ever accomplishing itself. Generally speaking, this is the man's way of looking, while the young imagine that the world is utterly sunk in wickedness and that the first thing needed is a thorough transformation. The religious mind, on the contrary, so he's jumping to the opposite side, and we sort of look like the first side, right? We want to change the world. We want to release this new world spirit. But the old man, the religious mind, on the contrary, views the world as ruled by divine providence and therefore correspondent with what already ought to be. But this harmony between the is and the ought to be is not torpid and rigidly stationary. The good, the final end of the world, has being only while it constantly produces itself, and the world of spirit and the world of nature continue to have this distinction, that the latter moves only in a recurring cycle, while the former certainly also makes progress. So he's saying that, yes, once you have these deeper realizations that everything is already perfect in essence, that you are supposed to bring that out into realization with your form. The point of life is to have the realization that it is achievable. It is this idea we're striving for, and you can achieve it, and that it is being achieved in history. At the end here, he's saying progress is being made. And so he says, you're not supposed to sit there and just have this ultimate realization that's already all perfect somewhere. You're in time, you're in space. You can use your body and mind to make the ideal in your finite world. That's part of the point of being here and the beauty of realization. And when you do that, you enter into these flow states that are beautiful. The process of right realization is part of the purpose. So we must be the change we want to see in the world. We do realize that there is something perfect already about it. We aren't seeing it in the beginning. That's why the world has so much abstraction, so much pain, because because we're not recognizing and communicating this essence, this right order of things that unites us in this harmony that we talked about before. But in order to do, when we do this, this is how we're going to welcome in the New World Spirit. It's going to be mystical. That's why the mystics are true. It is perfect in a way. We are acknowledging the supersensuous realm. And not only that, but we can determine it for ourselves. That's how we're going to win the Nobel Prizes in a practical way and start interfacing with our practical reality and this ideal that Hegel gives us and says is worth striving for. Even if you're a mystic, you're supposed to be striving for it. That's the point of giving your psychic teachings. It's to help guide people in this deeper reason that is underlying the superficial appearance of things. So if we win the Nobel Prizes, you get about $1 million for each one. It'll start helping us build this new financial system that we sublated between capitalism, socialism, and communism in Sessions of Spirit number 27. But do we really need this? Is the world really so bad? As we're interfacing with our current period, what problems are we really solving? Well, one thing is, even though we are technically in the most peaceful period in human history in terms of wars, even though the Ukraine and Russian war is blazing as we're talking now, and there's a lot of suffering going on there, and even though we technically have the least amount of people in extreme poverty percentage-wise, I think in terms of human history, and we have a lot of material abundance now. We can communicate across the internet. We have supply chains internationally. We have all this abundance. Despite all that, something paradoxical is happening, where in rich countries and poor countries alike, anxiety, depression, psychosis, mental illness is increasing. And I tried to find a graph that would kind of represent this, that was scientific. And I found this one from a hospital. It's a little bit dated, but it has gotten worse during the pandemic. It's even worse than this now. This is back in 2013, but we started seeing these trends. And this is in a rich country. So this isn't just material poverty. There's something spiritual, there's something inward happening. That material wealth is not satisfying. And it's this sense of belonging, this sense of harmony with our inner world and the outer world that is causing us to feel this inner disconnect of pure thought. And it leads to psychosis, this breaking reality, because the irrationality, remember that theodicy that we solved between, the supersensuous world, our current world, and sort of the spiritual world. We are spiritual beings that unite these two worlds together. There's this disconnecting that as we become more godly, as we reach apotheosis or theopoeosis as absolute spirit, reality does start to become more malleable because we've sort of started mastering the universals to a certain degree. And what can happen is that when you start to realize this nature, but your logic isn't solid, the essence of the pure thought isn't in a coherent order, when you start to break from reality, you end up in this you're a flag in the wind because your mind isn't organized enough to hold the sheer abundance of true reality inside of you, and you end up having a negative psychotic break where it could end up in absorbed patterns that create hormone releases that create bipolar chemical imbalances that we see as mental illness. All this weird stuff is starting to increase because it's a sheer abundance of our true knowledge coming through us, but we have to have a more concrete version. And if we don't have a more concrete version, we have all these abstractions that start to spark up all over the place and are like tail ends. They're like unfinished thoughts that spiral into chaos. And we see the trends of that sort of increasing now. On top of this mental process, the inner world is starting to become paradoxically unstable in rich and poor countries. There is an actual material poverty that's exacerbating this as well. So this is taken from the Credit Suisse Global Wealth Report, the most credible, what is regarded as the most credible financial report on the planet, run by banks themselves. A lot of central banks give their data to make this. So whether you're into Illuminati or conspiracy, you don't need to be to know that this trend is happening. This is just science. And the pandemic has actually made this even more extreme, where we have tremendous amounts of wealth being owned by the top. Whether they want it or not, it's just our broken system. So this creates a lot of desperation that doesn't allow people to think philosophically because they're stuck in what Hegel calls the particularity of nature, where he says even in human history, as we evolved in the history of humanity, we had to have some kind of freedom of mind to start breaking free of these particularities into the universal, what Buddhism tries to get in touch with through meditation, and through what Christians and Muslims try and get to through prayer. and what scientists try and get to through just being unbiased and observers in their experiments and clearing their minds, you know. So this is caused by a system, and we need to solve this in order to get a satisfaction of this too. They're tied together because we have those two worlds in ourselves. So we're not being naive here. We have to do something substantial and practical to bring in this new world spirit and have people thinking about this ontological proof, this new ontological proof of God that requires a higher universal thinking. People aren't going to get it at first. They're not going to know why it was different from Anselm and all these other guys. But the way that we're organizing information today is not very conducive to these, either the material solving of poverty and deficiency or this inner poverty. The problem's rooted in this abstract knowledge process that we have going on, of this kind of fragmented spirit coming through the world. And one of the best examples of a triumph of this abstractness, a triumph of this disconnect, is actually Wikipedia. Wikipedia is a huge, amazing triumph because we are approximating the universal of where philosophy should be. Philosophy is supposed to be the universal of all domains of knowledge. It's supposed to be universally available as we all seek wisdom. And Wikipedia was sort of this non-profit model that started centralizing in a collective way all this wisdom into our greatest technology right now, the internet, and an online encyclopedia called Wikipedia. So here's a problem with it though, and I am going to go over time if you guys don't mind, but this is really critical, and it's hard to grasp the profoundness of these small little changes, but they're going to have big effects. Wikipedia is already really good. Like a lot of scholarly, a lot of high schools anyway, a lot of places will actually accept Wikipedia as a scholarly source because you can cite scholarly sources and peer-reviewed sources in the citations in a really intricate way. But the problem isn't that necessarily. They've started solving the bias problem. They have meta tools to do that. The problem is that the organization itself is still fragmented. So the philosophy of philosophy, the science of science needs to improve. And this is what's currently happening without it. They have these beautiful little gateways, these portals they call them. And this one is about religion, Catholic philosophy, scholasticism. And brilliantly, they're starting to tie it to contingent history, kind of like Hegel does in his history of philosophy, but they don't do it nearly as concretely. They kind of have this, what Hegel calls an arrangement of knowledge, but an arrangement of knowledge doesn't have necessity to it. It's just they look similar and you kind of put them in a way that looks nice and kind of fits together. There's some kind of pattern, but you're not doing it in the universal logic. It allows misunderstandings to occur. And so they're giving Aquinas, Scotus, Duns Scotus, and Occam as sort of these guys that played a role somehow in this portal, but they don't make the connections explicit. They just say, well, it has something to do with ethics. These guys have something to do with metaphysics. They're from different schools, and they're all philosophers or considered philosophers, even though they're religious. So they're not making even the distinction between this contradiction of philosophy and religion clear. They're blending them by saying Catholic philosophy. But what is the distinction? We give that distinction in essence by using the supersensuous and sensuous distinction, the dialectic. So this is good. This is way better than we were years ago, but it's still not solving these problems of disconnect that's leading to these mental illnesses and this hyper competition that's allowing the concentration of wealth through the academic enterprise, the corporate enterprise, the corporatization of academia and our universities, and also the incredibly efficient and profound research of private transnational corporations, which are hiring their own departments to do their own research and beat universities. Pfizer, these guys are amazingly fast and efficient. So how do we solve this problem, this confusion that is slowly becoming more clear? Not like this. Here's another example of a text version of saying, well, okay, there's these groups, we can put them into categories, but even the categorization is not in this necessary order of universal logic. We have astrology mixed with epistemology, logic, metaphysics, all these things. And then we have them listed in this kind of like, well, why is economics here? And then we have physics and we have music up here. Isn't music a human thing? Shouldn't it be down like next, you know, it shouldn't be ahead of mathematics. It should be somewhere in like social sciences down here. And they try and organize it into schools of thought. So they're approximating something. And what they're approximating is what we know. They're approximating the universal logic and what Hegel calls the true encyclopedia, what he calls the encyclopedia of the philosophical sciences that circles back on itself, where all these domains are actually ordered in a necessary logical order. He actually says you don't just go randomly, we're approximating that order now. Here's the true way to order these categories in the pictures I just showed you. Number one, metaphysics actually belongs to logic. The supersensuous realm, the determinate realm that Hegel defines as the science of logic, belongs here. Nature, of course, is not mentioned very much in these pictures, so we'll skip that for now. Most of what they're talking about is spirit, and you can see it's in a syllogism: logic, nature, spirit, 1, 2, 3. But within spirit, we have another syllogism, which is subjective spirit, absolute spirit, and the other categories are in these ones. Objective spirit has ethics and history and schools in it, and the last one is where we have philosophy itself. This is in a necessary order. This is the way we're supposed to think these knowledge categories so that they make sense and are easily learnable in a heuristic. Because once you grasp the universal logic, that metaphysical logic, it's just working its way out in fractal form in all these other more concrete knowledge domains. This is going to astoundingly accelerate the learning process from this, what Hegel calls literal torture. We're literally torturing our kids. Even though the Wikipedia that we have today is way better and more concrete, it's starting to put the domains kind of in this order. We're forcing children to learn this by rote memorization rather than the internal, what Hegel calls the internal necessity, the inner unity that is already immanent to our thought categories and our knowledge domains. It becomes much more heuristic. You can think through it because it makes sense with a lot less brain power than holding these abstractions in your mind that starts to overwhelm people, especially people who aren't privileged with higher IQ, right? So learning the inner necessity is going to be a huge equalizer. How should we really organize these domains? This is how. This is what the new Wikipedia is going to look like. I'm showing it for the first time based on Hegel's Encyclopedia of the Philosophical Sciences. Some of these categories didn't exist in his time, so I'm updating it right now. So the true traditional logic is really just logic, nature, spirit, in that order, in the absolute syllogism we talked about last time. We're going to fit all those categories that you saw in the picture into each one of these three. Formal logic and mathematics fit into these. So even though it looks like a big mess, there's only two that are really just in logic. Then nature has, of course, space, time, cosmology, physics. Even these categories are ordered. It has to start with space. Then it goes to time. Time is the negation of space to Hegel. Then it goes to cosmology, which is the sum total of all this time and space. Then it gets to physics, and then color, and then and we get to biology and more complex sciences until biology results in life that gives rise to consciousness, which we call spirit, which starts with mind. Geography affects your mind, human nature itself, happiness. Eudaimonia happens here, as we covered before, and Aristotle and ancient Greeks, but that leads to psychiatry, eventually social science, law, business, the state, and then to this kind of universal morality and civic society, and then to R&D, research and development, and this universal kind of science that dictates our sort of global process of value creation. So this is going to help people tremendously in their personal lives to overcome their material poverty, because they're going to have a lot more brain space and a lot clearer language to prevent these misunderstandings that keep people in abstraction. And it's going to take a little while to teach it and transition our education systems over to this order, but it's all going to be centered around what is already defined. Hegel already gives us the encyclopedia already. The entire encyclopedia of the philosophical sciences is already completed, he said. And most scholars right now think, no, that's just an outline. That's not the real science. No, Hegel actually wrote that after his first masterpieces. The masterpieces were a deep dive. And then he said, I'm not going to have time to do the whole thing. So he said, I'm just going to get it out of the way for my high school students. But it's actually not dumbed down. It's the real order. You just have to fill it out. And he says, you need to do these. It's the largest logical moves that his bigger books fill in the finer details. And that's all we're doing with Wikipedia and all of our departments across the world, is we're just getting deeper and deeper and deeper in the circle of knowledge. So do not mistake current scholarship to throw the encyclopedia out, or even to treat it as something that's frivolous. That is the most incredible thing you could possibly be looking at once you understand it. The sum total of all human knowledge in its necessary order for the first time. And we are going to improve it, but that's the first time anybody has ever done that. And Hegel does it in a simple enough way that it makes it look like a high school student can learn it, because they can. And it's a lot easier than the current way we're teaching them. So once this happens, people are going to start experiencing a belonging. The knowledge belongs to them, and they belong in the knowledge, and they belong in the world, because the world, our institutions are kind of structured on this. The limit of your knowledge is the limit of your world, as Wittgenstein says. our structures, the rationality in our structures are going to be as abstract as our Wikipedia, basically. But once you start gaining this concreteness, something squishy and profound starts to happen. These soft elements that is normally ignored in hard sciences, that are usually relegated to emotion, female world, like stereotypes of femininity, the social scientists. This is kind of the point, but we can merge it with this universal logic. And you start gaining this sense of significance. Significance is incredibly important to human beings, or else you experience that existential moment of angst, existential crisis. So it's funny to say that just improving our Wikipedia can create profound senses of human satisfaction, but it does. Significance is actually what all these life coaches today are teaching technically. And one of the biggest life coaches today is a guy named Tony Robbins, part of the Oprah crew. He has these 6 human needs, and he has one of them as significance. But Hegel also talks about this hundreds of years before Tony Robbins, and he says, every signification, every sign that has meaning, therefore, in which they afterwards appear, and he's talking about logic here, pure being and pure nothing. The very first pure thoughts that we have to organize as knowledge, that even the absolute beginning has this significance to it. He says, you grasp them in their abstract form, like almost less than nothing. He says, as they afterwards appear and become more concrete as real knowledge, he says, is only a more precise specification and truer definition of the absolute, the whole. And when that is done, the mere abstract being and nothing are replaced by a concrete in which both these elements form an organic whole. That's what the Encyclopedia of the Philosophical Sciences is doing. It literally starts with pure being and pure nothing, and it just becomes more and more concrete as all the other domains of knowledge. They are all growing into each other. Even our pure thoughts that we never think to question, they are growing into each other in this logical order. That's what the real metaphysics is supposed to be scientifically. Once we realize that we're part of this process, we become an organic part of society. You have significance because the logic in you, the purpose of your life becomes clearer, and you find your place in the whole. And you find this supreme freedom. He says the supreme form of not as a separate principle would be freedom. But freedom is negativity in that stage when it sinks self-absorbed to a supreme intensity and is itself an affirmation and an even absolute affirmation. So even when you're being negative and trying to clarify what your purpose is, you eventually end up in this positive freedom, this more organic, developed freedom where you belong. And it's not just caprice and abstract negating of everything, the absolute not. There's a necessity in you, a destiny. Real freedom is the uniting of caprice, abstract freedom, doing whatever you want, which creates existential angst, and necessity, this higher potential inside of you as part of this higher community that you can actualize in that conscious life that Hegel was talking about in that quote of the picture that began this session. So this significance from pure knowledge, just thinking clearly, is what it's all about. And Hegel knew it from the beginning. But how do we have this conversation? How do we get people thinking this way once we even have it? Yeah, we have the Encyclopedia of the Philosophical Sciences, Mark, but we've had that for 200 years and nobody understands it. And we still have like 2 huge factions of left and right Hegelians. It's like just having the answer is not enough. That's right. We have to teach it so people can experience the significance that's significant to them. We have to meet them where they are. This is where the talks on the 16 passive Parmenides and this Socratic Platonic dialectic, the way we talk to each other is part of the point. We have to be precise in our words. There's a book called The 4 Agreements, and one of them in the New Age kind of world is that you have to be precise with your words because they mean a lot. They come with a lot of principles, like Wittgenstein's language games. You have to be careful. So when we speak, we're going to be speaking with this new wisdom around language and how we talk and treat each other. And I give 2 examples here from the previous sessions of spirit. So remember in the 16 passive Parmenides, this is one of the paths that is one of the most painful. It's called creation locking. We have person 1, and then you have person 2 here. These are people. And now that we know that Hegel really did use the triad, and modern scholarship is just reading the first version, right? They're just grasping the abstract negation because there's so much pain to the ego that nobody really reaches the end. Nobody really puts the time in. And the only way I broke through was because I just gave 3,000 hours of my life and just trusted that something was going to happen, and it did. We just need to get more people doing that, and the way we talk can speed that up if we use the Socratic Platonic dialogue that breaks out of the conversation that's in this painful mode, which is our default currently in society. By default, our thinking is in the mode of negation, Hegel calls it. We want to raise that to sublation. But this is what abstract negation looks like in some of its worst forms. This is like a double bind that we talked about earlier. Person one, person two are these triads. The pink is where they actually are in reality, and red is where they think they are in their minds. And if you look at this one, person one is actually in position one, but they think they're in position two. Their language is communicating the opposite of what they mean. And Hegel says that happens when you don't have the circle of reason and you don't understand what you're saying. The path to hell is paved with good intentions because of this dialectical reversal. If you don't understand the dialectic, it's going to turn you into the opposite. So you think you're here, but you're actually here. And then person two is thinking that they're here, but they're actually in position two. And person two thinks that this person is in position two as well. So there's a double meaning to this red dot. It also represents the thinking of the second person. So there's a huge amount of confusion here. How is this conversation going to unfold? Well, both of them think that both of them are actually in D2, but they don't realize they're different. Person one is going to see person two as an enemy. Why? Because they look like they're in opposite positions in their confused way of thinking. Because person one thinks they're in position two, and they see person one or person two in position one, it's a little bit confusing. They're on opposite sides, right? One is on this side, one is on this side. So they're going to war with each other in abstract negation. That's why they lock their creative potential. The notion is the infinite vitality coming through you scientifically, right? But you get locked in those double binds if you don't know how to sublate. So person two also looks at person one as being on the opposite side, and they conflict. But the craziness of this example is that even if they were to embody their real positions, they're still going to be an abstract negation. So there's like a double bind here, that even if they get clear on their positions, they're still going to war. So this is like what's happening times 1,000. And this is why this absolute clarity, this simple diagram of the triads, is something Hegel endorses later on, because this separation is what essence is. If you can't separate two concepts by a single abstract opposition, or narrow it down to pure being or some kind of other opposition, then you don't understand it clearly enough, and these weird conflations will happen to you. So somebody in the Sessions of Spirit said they want to actually have a concrete example of one of the rows, because I give you all 16, right? That's a concrete example of how these two individuals will look at each other. You can do this on any topic, whether it's religion in position one, or science or philosophy in position two. Whatever the oppositions are, just put them in the positions, and then you can work out how that conversation will look like in its particularity, in its subject matter. But here's how we're going to get out of this. So we said the ideal philosopher doesn't react in negation, they react in sublation. And if you don't know what sublation is by this point, you can go back and look at it, but it's this transcendence where both people are operating from a position or a space where they just trust that the world is rational, and they know that the meta is this triadic form where it doesn't make a lot of sense to sit in this abstract negation and negate each other. There's actually a space where you can do real science, real philosophy, and you can hold a space of compassion to let the argumentation work its way out in a cooperative way, because you know the process. You don't have to have a war like societies did in medieval ages and before, where you have to like take your whole civilization and just destroy each other in a huge death battle to uncover an idea. It says that's how history worked out this process in the past. But because we're becoming more rational, we make the process more blessed, more peaceful, through sheer explicit realization of what's really going on clearly. So now what we see is person one is at D4, which is the synthesis, not the external synthesis, not the arbitrary one, what Hegel calls the inner synthesis. And then person two is also at D4. And so what do they see? They see each other in the same position, which means person one sees them as an ally, a genuine philosopher, and they know how to recognize that because they're not in any of the other abstract positions. They're not stuck there. They can go there freely, but they're not stuck there. These two are stuck there. They can't get out of this because they don't realize the D4, the position, the fourth position. These guys do. So this person sees the first person as an ally, and this person has the clarity to see the other guy. They're both knowing, they're both in sublation, and they both know that they're in sublation. That's a genuine philosopher. And that's the only time we can free each other from these abstract negations when they come into our lives, because these two can hold opposite positions on anything. You're allowed to negate each other. philosophy is about the first negation, it's about polemic, it's about critique. But they know that's just a process of clarification that eventually results in sublation. So they always stay in that spirit of sublation, looking for it, pulling the ideal out. So in terms of religion and philosophy, we did this in the canceling of sin sessions. So you can go and look that up as well. But really, philosophy and science, philosophy is the sublation of religion. It's not the negation. It's this transcendental point. It's not this abstract point, which abstract philosophers take it to be, or even abstract theologians. It goes on both sides. So this is how we have to start having conversations universally. All we have to do, as impossible as this sounds, because it looks like human beings are totally irrational, but we are making progress. In terms of the strategy that we spoke about yesterday to win the Nobel Prizes, we don't have to have this conversation known by everybody right away. All we have to do is get 3 to 10% of the human species to start operating from the place of sublation and understanding why it's the universal form, it's the universal syllogism, like we showed, right? You only need to do this with the genuine philosophers of the world, 3%, to get a critical mass to get 100% of the population on board. 3% is a lot more realistic than 100%, which is 8 billion people. If we take all the women in the world and we start releasing their potential as philosophers, that's a huge boost already. And there's a lot of women that don't look philosophical, but actually are, but are oppressed, and are, as we come out of this patriarchal mode of philosophy. And I give you a stat about how the Nobel Peace Prize process itself, even though we're glorifying it as this great process of recognition in the universe, it is inherently exacerbating this in a certain way, where out of 873 prizes that have been given since the prizes started like 100 years ago, only 57 have been given to women. And so to have a boost, we can fix what these graphs are showing and involve a lot more people in the process of universal philosophy. And interestingly, because women are generally more oppressed in this master-slave dialectic, what do we know from the master-slave dialectic? The slave has a more inward experience, actually. They're forced to go inward, and they discover the realm of pure thought in its more concrete form. And that's where Stoicism first comes from. But we need to liberate people in that form, whether they're children, women, slaves, sex trafficking, whatever it is. We need to start getting to this liberation and getting these people who have this deeper experience of the inner world, knowing how to explicate it. Because generally the stereotype is that women are more intuitive creatures. They just know they know, but they don't know how to explicate it. And so they can be marginalized that way. So we're going to give tools in this genuine philosophy to let all people who are stuck in that mode, whether you're a Stoic in any gender, to start getting into skepticism, unhappy consciousness, and then to genuine reason, which is the liberation from that. And you can read about that in the philosophy, in the phenomenology of spirit that Hegel wrote as his first masterpiece. You can see that it's a very real problem today for women. And the Nobel Prize will have to rise up as we're rising up. We're going to fix that. So that's one way we're going to get to the 3% critical mass. But it's not just women. Right now, women are actually already making this change. There are more women in universities, at least in North America, than men. So what we're going to get, if we're not wise, is we're going to get a dialectical reversal, where we're still going to remain in the trap, in that abstract negation. We're just going to reverse the roles. Men are going to become oppressed. So we need to make sure our systems are protecting everybody, because this new spirit is universal. Literally everybody, criminals too. Everybody is going to start sublating and having this higher level Socratic dialogue. We're pulling out the inner contradictions that leads to the truth of why their fragmented reason, why that distorted Wikipedia that they learned from their parents or whoever traumatized them, the church, whoever. We're going to bring that out and make it more concrete in this living logic, bring them back to life. So what's going to have to happen is, as we're approaching this new universal way of communicating with each other, and bringing in more people, and I actually do want to say one more thing here. The church, it's now coming out that there was a tremendous amount of sexual abuse that happened in the most sacred areas of where philosophy and religion and divine truth was supposed to happen. And it explains a lot of why our society is stuck in this mode. And the Pope was just in my town here in Edmonton talking about apologizing for the residential schools, which is like the worst case of trying to make the Wikipedia concrete for people that don't share that particularity. And it was like pure oppression. And we're now discovering mass graves and a whole bunch of things that happen when you try to do good, when you try to be good, but you do it in a particular form, you abstractly negate. So this education process is really profoundly interesting, but also necessary to heal these long-standing tensions that have been undermining society and genuine philosophy since slavery and human subjugation has been happening for thousands of years, even since the ancient pyramids, even though their slaves were treated a little bit better maybe than some of the people in society today. But we need to genuinely liberate everybody. And so that's how we're really going to get to the 3% critical mass. And there are a lot of people that want to learn. So in this process of getting everybody activated in every country around the world, we're going to transform the Nobel Prizes themselves. And this is where this session is going to become pretty profound, and not just transforming individuals in their knowledge, but it's going to transform society itself universally. Every nation on earth, through this knowledge process of wisdom making, more concrete wisdom making, is going to have practical institutional effects. And it's going to begin with how we award prizes or how we award material success to knowledge itself, knowledge discovery. It's going to make it fair that this knowledge is accessible to everyone, and everyone feels a part of making that knowledge. When you feel a part of making that knowledge, you gain an extra sense of that significance because you are sublating into the structure. You are getting the sense of ideality going on, that you are part of this concrete whole of creating the best that society has to offer. You know, we saw a fragment, if you want to know what I'm talking about concretely, we got a glimpse of this in the space war between Russia and the United States. They told their nation, they're saying, we're in a race to go to the moon. And they had a concrete path to get there, a critical path, and they sort of invented it as they went. But it was a tremendous accomplishment that inspired the human species. Some people will say, well, we didn't really go to the moon. This is the fake moon landing, all this kind of stuff. That's because people don't feel like they belong enough to science to get into the facts and the data of how incredible of a feat that really was. And so we need to make those people belong, a part of NASA, a part of the actual process. Even if they don't understand it fully, everybody has to see their role as a part of it. And that they are part of this new spiritual hierarchy that is concrete equality, not abstract equality, where we're making everybody flat and equal. We're not flat and equal in material reality. That's what communism might have been stereotyped as doing in the past. That's what oppresses the greatest people in our society. And in their cleverness, they always find a way out of any kind of structure because they don't believe in it, because it's not speculative enough to grasp their true potential. So we are not going to make that mistake. If you do not think that a janitor did not participate in the landing of the space rover on the moon, if you don't think that the teacher, the high school teacher, played a role in that, if you don't think that every single person in society played a role in landing on the moon, you're mistaken. We are already in a hierarchy where people are all participating, and it's in this graph right here. We have already organized pretty much every job in society based on IQ. And a lot of people will say IQ is not a universal standard. It's not applicable. There's tons of flaws. The data doesn't support it. But actually it does. And there are some edge cases where it doesn't. And we're approximating those in terms of abstract negation. When people, even if you're a genius, if you absorb an abstract negation, a trauma of some kind, and it doesn't sublate in yourself and it fragments yourself inside of you, it'll fragment you from the world. And your material success reflects that fragmentation because you want to externalize the pain. The inner and the outer are connected, as we talked about in The Power of Now and Eckhart Tolle and all that. It just logically wants to externalize itself and find the other so that it can heal itself. It's always looking to sublate because it's spirit. It's the concrete logic trying to realize itself through us. And so that's the only time that it destroys material success. High IQ in any other mode starts sublating very quickly, and success comes along with that, long-term success. So what we need to do is get people's thinking more concrete to heal those traumas. And that's what psychoanalysis and Lacan and Freud and Jung and all these amazing scientists of the mind were trying to grasp. But Hegel already did it in his concrete version of psychology. But IQ really does have an invisible privileging that basically structures our whole society. You see it in a graph. So the lowest positions that get the least pay, the low minimum wage workers, the janitors, all these stereotypes, they really do have a little bit of truth to them, that people who usually sort down to that level can't compete because they're just not born with that privilege. But why do we punish people on something they did not get to choose? We're supposed to have the American dream. We're supposed to have this communist ideal that everybody to each their ability to each their reward, right? Marx. We need to get to the truth of what human nature really is, which is this knowledge processing. And we have different wetware that allows us different efficiencies of processing electrons basically into these patterns. But there's a great equalizer in Hegel's Encyclopedia of Philosophical Sciences that we can all realize that inward connection a lot more efficiently. And that the people who aren't born with that privilege shouldn't be punished for it. That dream of working hard and getting the best that society has to offer is going to happen. The capitalist dream is not going to be negated in this sublation of capitalism and socialism into communism or scientific spirit or whatever you want to call the synthesis, the sublation. We're going to approximate for those privileges and we're going to say, okay, you are super privileged. You are in these more concrete or more difficult jobs, the surgeons, all these types of things down here that usually get a lot of material wealth. People can still do that because whether you pay a surgeon a lot or not, they want to actualize. You don't have to pay somebody to want to experience flow state and release their ultimate potential. Nobody wants to be in boredom or apathy. If you deprive people of accessing their greatest challenges, they die on the inside. It kills that life because we want to be this living logic. And so you don't have to give millions of dollars to get amazing people to rise up to their potential. That's the mistake we're making in current material reality, that we think providing external incentives makes happen. Extrinsic motivators actually do not work except in mechanical jobs. But because of the way we're going to restructure society, we're going to make innovation or sublation an automatic part of every job so that nobody stays in that mechanical mode. And then this way, you only need intrinsic motivators to get people to rise up because it's not just something we do, it's literally who we are. Our structure is literally reason, rationality, thinking itself. So we are going to stop punishing spiritual beings who chose to be in these types of bodies. We're going to redefine what hard work really means. Hard work is only possible, or the limit of how hard you can work is the limit of your glucose processing in your brain. So when you run out of sugar in your brain, you can't work hard anymore. You look lazy, you are overwhelmed, all these types of things. If we challenge people at the level that they need to be challenged, where the perceived challenge level matches their skill level, like in those 4 criterion of good games that we talked about in Sessions of Spirit, I think number 18, the one about benign violation theory and all of that, then we can allow people to work hard and reach flow state and increase their productivity by 700%, whether they're a janitor, whether they're a machine operator, it doesn't matter. We're all in a spiritual equality, where if you work to your potential in your flow game, in the Worldwide Essential Workers app, the WeWa app, then you get the best that society has to offer because you did work hard. You worked the hardest you possibly could without burning out. We want to get rid of this culture of anxiety and depression that we saw in the graph above, where this explosion of information is overwhelming everybody. Even the high IQ people are overwhelmed. There's just too much to keep up with, even in a singular field. So how is philosophy as this universal not going to overwhelm everybody by grasping all of these categories? We're going to do it by this inward unity, this heuristical kind of learning, which is the nature of how we actually are. And we're going to approximate and measure with compassion what everybody's potentials are to work hard. And we're going to create these flow games that are based on intrinsic motivators, and then just supply all their needs and wants based on a new kind of economy called the resource-based economy. But there will be a hierarchy, but there's a spiritual concrete equality that goes along with it, which is what allows us to experience the purpose of life, which is just rising to our absolute best, the idea of ourselves, the ideal. And you do that by experiencing flow state. Okay, that requires a high level of knowledge. That's why the dialectical coordination in that concrete encyclopedia is necessary, because to know human beings, you have to upgrade our psychoanalysis and all this stuff to represent the real categories of human thinking and human being. So there is models that have already kind of grasped this, and they've already realized the contradictions in society. The Indian caste system, for example, knew that there was differences between people, but they were doing it based on families and all this privilege. And their approximations are ending up in a tremendous amount of suffering, where if you do get a genetic mutation and somebody in the Dalit class is born with high IQ, but they're forced to stay at these other flow games that don't match them, then they get tremendously oppressed. So that's what needs to change. You're allowed to have social mobility depending on what your potential is, because your material wealth isn't based on that anymore. It's just a clarification process. We're all moving together as one in our uniqueness. That's why you can have a singular essence uniting everybody, but not in this weird oppressive way. We're actually allowing infinite diversity. So one of these projects that approximates this kind of measuring, this profound concrete measuring, is something called the Venus Project. And the reason why I mention them is because they do something that Hegel says real philosophy needs to do. Genuine philosophy needs to be the new universal, which is at the heart of society and is at its center. So that means, as we covered before, real value and surplus value is created by extraction of knowledge from the idea, this dialectical process, and then it gets commercialized and turned into goods and services that upgrades all of society. And all those mechanical jobs become less mechanical because we're automatically upgrading them with these new ideas. The distribution of those ideas are what the problem is, right? First of all, knowledge isn't really connected to where it needs to be in terms of a societal model. And the way that it's happening is in abstract negation, fragmentation, because not everybody is seen as an essential part of it. The janitor cleans the building that makes the labs or wherever the scientists are doing the research from being a disease zone, right? You can get sick, just like what happened at Wuhan or something like that. Like maybe somebody slipped and they broke something, who knows? Even the people who are on road construction crews, they're getting cancer from the suboptimal way we're building roads with asphalt here in North America anyway. And they're having a tremendous amount of suffering in the healthcare system, which in the end is costing us more, right? So we should upgrade that so that people aren't paying a great cost. But they're also building the roads of how our researchers get to the labs, you know? Everybody is actually performing an essential role. And if they're not, we need to make their flow game that they self-determine. We're not doing this Platonic guardian thing. I put in the comments that Hegel was against that, right? He sublated that. You have to self-determine your flow game. We just give you an encyclopedia and an app to make it fast enough so you get immediate feedback so you can determine in a realistic way what kind of flow game is good for you. And that if it's too mechanical, you report that to the system, and then this universal of universals, this university, the universal university, upgrades the knowledge-based encyclopedia to restructure society as a new good or service, a new innovation. And so Jacques Fresco kind of drew these beautiful artistic versions of what a city would look like if you put university and knowledge and wisdom at the center. And he said, this is the research center in the middle of what he calls a circle city. And he says, designing these cities in circles is actually incredibly efficient because of all these mathematical laws and all these purifications of thought and all the stuff that he did. And you have resident, like the business class, and you kind of have all the living far away from the mechanization. So it's very peaceful. And it's just a really sustainable model based on a higher wisdom. And everybody's allowed to visit the university and see the sum total of all human knowledge and enjoy it in their leisure time, because that's what we need spiritually. When we go to the mall and we buy the next bling or the next purse or whatever, we're witnessing the idea in a new form. And that's the point. So we need not just a university. And if you think about it, university has universal in it. It has one of the elements of the notion that Hegel talks about. The true notion is universal, particular, and individual. We have to have a universal university. We have particular universities, and they're all warring right now, right? But there's a universal university, and it's going to be this genuine philosophy. Where they're going to use the institutions as the particular to mediate the education process to all the citizens in this new concrete way, which is that encyclopedia of the philosophical sciences, the new Wikipedia that everybody has access to. And we're going to have these new structures probably unfold to represent this new harmony. So that's Jacques Fresco's artistic vision. But Buckminster Fuller was also a great mind that thought kind of like Hegel, very concrete. He saw everything belonging together and got to the deep logic, but he didn't purify it enough to grasp the universality like Hegel did, to put it into the universal logic. He had big fragments of it, kind of like Aristotle did. And one of them was this beautiful concept and this aesthetically pleasing concept of ephemeralization that he called doing more with less. And his geodesic dome was this incredibly strong structure, but with less material in it. because the information in the structure is what provided the extra surplus value, the extra, well, yeah, I guess value that came into our world through that structure. So these two geniuses were grasping this concrete way of thinking that Hegel gives us in the Encyclopedia of the Philosophical Sciences, times 1,000, Hegel gives it. But the good news about Bucky and Jacques Fresco is that they weren't just thinkers and idealizers, they were doers. They had practical spirit. So our society will be building these universal universities, starting with us and these sessions of spirit. But the critical path, the actual step-by-step process of the strategy, like we talked about yesterday, is necessary. And Buckminster Fuller kind of gives us a way to think about that and build off of him. And this is where I started getting a little more practical. And once I understood Hegel, it's supercharged what these guys were saying. Before, there wasn't enough to act on, but now that it's concrete, it's circled back on itself. Now we can solve the problem between religion and philosophy and all these big contradictions, male, female, all these things that they seem unsublatable are now sublatable because of Hegel. So the critical path means broadcasting this kind of new universal university and new structure of society that we're all in one belonging to uncovering the idea, the absolute idea. That's why religion is going to love this, because we're just determining the perfect determinations of God. We're self-determining spirit returning to itself as this perfect idea that comes to us as commercialized surplus value. And then that kind of comes to our quality of living materially in this ephemeral process of higher quality of life, more efficiency, more recognition with each other as thinking beings. So one practical way on the critical path to getting more people having these conversations and feeling like they belong to one process in their infinite diversity that is protected by this new global spirit is this global game. Remember that the whole purpose of life is to, as you're getting to the end goal, the journey is the point, is to experience it on the way. And the best way to experience it is in that golden, that sort of like that sweet spot between, I think there's 8 human emotions. There's like there's apathy, boredom, and relaxation. That's underwhelming. And then you get to the sweet spot, which is like just the right challenge. You're growing in your goals. But if your goals are too hard, then you get into arousal and anxiety and depression and all that kind of stuff. So this new broadcasting system is going to help people feel like all these games that we're part of in what we call society is all working towards the same thing. And they can clearly see if it's being distributed to them. So I just got acquainted with something called open broadcasting software or open broadcasting service. And it's open source, which means it's universally accessible, like Wikipedia. This open access economy, open science is what we want to do with Hegel's encyclopedia. Wisdom should be universally available. The work you do in the games is what you might get your material wealth from, but if it's calibrated properly, you're going to get everything you need and more to participate in this more and more. But open broadcast allowed me to create like a news station for free. And now that we have Facebook and all these platforms across the planet with live streaming because of the pandemic, you can reach literally billions of people with these simple broadcasting softwares. I added these statistics to my broadcasts as the sessions progressed. This is the game. So now we have the wisdom quiz. We have 15 people taking it, and nobody has passed yet. Once this green number grows, we're going to start getting more and more genuine philosophers, and it's going to start accelerating because the more people we have operating from that place of sublation, all the conversations start to become more like dialectically pleasant, like Plato and Socrates in their schools. And it was fun to do philosophy. But so far, there's just me currently, because I'm the first one to understand Hegel in probably 200 years, or at least get us pointed on the direction. People are going to point out contradictions in my interpretation because I'm just getting started. But we have to get started now and getting big minds thinking about this, because we are experiencing this concentration in a really kind of intense way that is straining the planet. So as more people take this is the new education system. We have the synchronicity document of philosophies, which is all the philosophies span through history sublated in terms of the Encyclopedia of the Philosophical Sciences. So we're just showing how for thousands of years we've been really saying the same essence, but now we're doing it determinately in a scientific way. That's going to connect all the sciences together and unite people who want to use different symbols. It's going to be like honoring the poetry between our science, you know? That's why you're allowed to have infinite diversity. because the supersensuous thoughts underneath don't have any sensuousness. They don't have color or anything, so you can dress them up any way you want, as long as the dialectical movement doesn't change, unless there's a good reason for it to change, because genuine reason is the truth. That's why science has to be part of the art, and art is part of the science. So you can see that we have 110 philosophers in the synchronicity document already. So that means 110 columns, from ancient Egypt to Plato to Socrates to modern philosophers even today. We have 47 pure thoughts concepts in the encyclopedia listed in their necessary order. And we have about 20 edits that are currently pending on figuring out what people were saying and aligning them. In terms of live sublations, this is how we're going to overcome conversation by conversation every abstract negation until every person self-determines that they want to jump on board with the peaceful revolution. You have to convince them. There's no totalitarian, there's no coercion, there's no nothing. It has to happen through the inner unity of pure thought, which is realization. So far, I haven't convinced anybody concretely to come on board with me. There's people who are helping in the background, but they don't know how to sublate, and they still have abstract negation. So I could count them, but I'm going to hold this at a very high level that when we sublate, it's a genuine sublation. So actually, I do have one person, but I haven't updated yet. And then, of course, there's the biggest sources of concrete science, what we call divine texts. They're actually like a proto-science of the total concreteness of the supersensual, Hegel's science of logic. So we're going to reorder them in terms of the essence of God that they're looking for, the science of sciences atheistically. So far with the Bible, we're not going to change the passages. The passages have to kind of stay the same to honor the text, right? But the order is contingent. The order was just thrown together by the Council of Nicaea because Rome did all its stuff. And so the order, we suspect, is just these divine minds tapping into the science of logic, the encyclopedia, but in its abstract form, because they couldn't grasp what Jesus grasped, for instance, or Buddha, or the disciples weren't as connected, so their abstractions came into the edification of the writing. So far, we have 6 Bible verses put in those 47 ordered concepts of the encyclopedia. We have 6 of them, thanks to help from a reverend we had helping us from the United Church. We have a non-denominational Christian. We have a few people. We have an atheistic Christian, actually, somebody who escaped Christianity and is now an atheist, coming to help with their old knowledge. It's a beautiful kind of synthesis because you're doing science and spirituality at the same time. So we got 6 now, and we're also teaching Hegel's science of logic through the passages, because you can leave comments in the spreadsheets that we're using. There's also the Quran. So we have one Quran scholar who has opted in to help me find good passages. So we have 6 Quran verses. I think they're called surahs, also positions. So they're kind of equal right now, but we have about 38,000 to do for the Old and New Testament. And I think the Quran has a few thousand as well. So there's quite a bit of work here, but as people get excited, this will accelerate as we have more and more people admitting that page and jumping in from all over the world. And then we have the worldwide Veda sessions, which we don't have anybody, but that's where I kind of started. I had a transcendental meditation teacher give me her books. And so I actually did the first 40 Vedas already. I ordered them to the first 40 categories in Hegel's science of logic, but also the entire encyclopedia. So that was the first brainwave for me. It was actually the Vedas. There was 40, and then there's these 40 categories, and I saw the parallel, the synchronicity. And then, of course, we're going to do it for Buddhism too, about 500 million Buddhists, the Tripitaka. We don't have any scholars yet for that. But if people want to send out the Buddhist session that we did on emptiness and Hegel, I think a lot of Buddhist scholars will recognize that there's something profound here that Hegel said. Even though he seemed to be discouraging or disparaging of Oriental philosophies, it was only because the mode they grasped it wasn't in the scientific form, in pure thought. But that doesn't mean Buddha didn't grasp it. It's just that he used parables and bamboo to communicate it, which allows unessential language to come in and people to kind of be missing the point, what Christians call sin. Another realization on this game is that while we're doing the Bible studies and we're putting them in scientific form, we're actually going to also start to broadcast daily mass. We're going to do what the churches, the synagogues, what they're doing, and we're going to do a global version of it, where as we're talking about the passages and thinking through them, the point is to think through them, and we're going to start positioning them in Hegel's science of logic together as a community. So we're going to start building community while doing the science, while advertising, while all feeling like we belong together in self-recognizing the process and understanding why we're positioning these passages the way we are. There's a tremendous education between science and religion happening in real time every day in a way that people can easily see how they belong to it. That would go for Bible masses, Quran, Catholic, Protestant, Buddhist monk schools, meditative practices. We'll find which each of the rituals are and just get the pure logic that's immanent within it, because it's all universal if it's truth. But it's all broadcasted very easily in one graphic on one broadcast. And we'll have like maybe live sublations that are really inspiring happening in the background, or whatever we want to, whatever we decide to put that brings the human spirit out. And of course, there's me in the corner. I'm live broadcasting right now on 6 different platforms. So we're on technically Facebook Live, YouTube, Discord, Twitch, Zoom, and I think there's one more somewhere. So there's an immense amount of outreach potential for this once it starts, people start sharing the link. And here's just another version of the software. It's free. You can use it yourself if you want to start copying me. Start getting the word out that these actually are the answer, or at least hopefully a part of the answer that we haven't heard before. And it'll inspire somebody to be like, yeah, I've never heard that before. And start asking the question, start negating to get to the sublation. Even if I'm missing it, I'm just pointing a direction. But you can see here in the smaller picture, I actually added the Nobel Prizes as part of the game last night. And so you can see here, there's 164 days left to the deadline to be nominated for the Nobel Prize. And you can see that just in the white, there's just one person working on each one that has passed the wisdom quiz. And that's just me right now. But more people will start joining this once they pass the wisdom quiz. And then these will start to take off exponentially fast in the 5 areas: peace, physics, chemistry, medicine, and literature. And they're in the order of the Living Encyclopedia already. They're in the order of Hegel's Encyclopedia of the Philosophical Sciences. Or in other words, they're in their philosophical order, their wise order. And here's me doing an interview with the street epistemologists who are actually starting to make my channel, or make their first spirit channel, grow almost exponentially. I think we had like hundreds of views in the last couple of days. But that's just the game we're playing. These are the rules of the game, and these will be upgraded as we learn more of what people need. But this is just how we're going to get people having this immediate feedback, the sense that they're part of the same game and that they are essential no matter what they're doing, from sweeping floors to whatever it is. Once people feel like they belong, you don't have to pay people to want to work, especially if the games are in flow and constantly innovating to make sure that they're living and not mechanical and killing the spirit, because people are intrinsically motivated. This is who we are. So you can be like, well, how do you compete with capitalism? Who's like, produce, undercut, race to the bottom. Well, the paradox is that when you treat a human being in the truth of who they are, they rise up ideally, and statistics have already shown in flow state psychology and in the military that human beings that are in flow produce 700% on average more than they do in these deadened states that we currently call jobs. So we actually gain more capitalism. We become more capitalist than capitalist because we're not negating capitalism. It is a critical ideal moment between socialism that moves in wisdom for this new rational ideal state, this new spirit, whether you want to call it communism or the Venus Project or whatever you want to call it. So please join me on the live feeds. And if you want to help update these numbers as fast and as wise as possible, I do update it every day, at least for the next 16 days while I'm able to do this full time. And if we can start raising some money ethically through gifts, we're not taking any venture cap, nobody's investing in this, it's pure. Everybody actually is an owner, because this is a global, worldwide, cooperative, social enterprise, meaning we're allowed to make profit, app. You are an owner of it, and it's going to stay that way. So it has to all be gifts in the beginning. Okay, so this global broadcasting station, why is it so important? It's because universal recognition is the point. That squishy stuff, that is the point. If you don't have belonging, if you don't have all these things, then you're not getting the optimal, ideal human experience. And your being will start to die in this world, and you'll start to feel like it's not worth living. And that's why suicides are going up as well in rich and poor countries. In poor countries, religion is still kind of keeping people inspired through the intense suffering. But it's not scientific enough for them to be competitive to break out of it. World trade is incredibly exploitive right now. As we talked about in previous sessions, there's not fair trade certification in every good. And we're going to do that now. With this universal process of self-recognition, from our schooling to the encyclopedia to the trade to literally every part that the encyclopedia covers concretely. So this universal self-recognition is going to be supercharged through the synchronicity document of philosophies. It is a concrete totality. It brings people together and feeling like their favorite philosopher that they love to follow is being considered. We are listening to literally every philosopher over the last 3,000 years and religious inspired leader. But there's something more that has to happen. Not only are you recognized through your favorite philosopher or favorite ideology or favorite religion in their own symbology, because we're not doing any oppressive, like particular sensuous colonizing. We're taking the invisible super sensuous logic that's already in it into a fulfillment because it's a foundation. We're showing that the synchronicity document is even more profound. It's not just a historical and even present document where we're putting CRISPR and like even modern researchers, but it's representative of concrete God, what we covered earlier, of you being wrapped up in this divine process, even absolute atheism grounding itself in this absolute process of becoming the absolute living syllogism. The most living syllogism of all that we talked about last time was not only the spirit, logic, nature in its right order, in its philosophical order in the encyclopedia, but that you recognize yourself as the spirit in this process. And so the synchronicity document of philosophies includes your personal philosophy. So we have all the previous famous philosophers in 3,000 years, which I'll show you now. 3,000 years ago, when we started having recorded human history, this is all the famous philosophers, yes, listed. But guess what? At the end, we have the power of now. We have current philosophers, but we also have ourselves. So genuine citizens of this new universal spirit, this new state, will be in the synchronicity document. And as you're learning the encyclopedia or challenging the encyclopedia, maybe you will change an order and we'll have to incorporate it because it's genuine science. Everybody will sort of be in this document who trusts the system. Nobody's going to be forced to use this. You can be removed at any time if you want, because if you do not self-recognize with the system, you don't trust it. And if you don't trust it, it's because there's a negation that's not accepting your truth. And that doesn't mean abstract truth. We're not talking about caprice, the truth that's in somebody. And there's a way to bring that out. And people recognize it through this coherence, this feeling of goodness, but also they can explicate it in terms of the thoughts of their philosophy and the order that they put things. They can justify it. And then we can have a dialogue in a very cogent way. So here's citizen one, Godot Beckett. I just took that because I was inspired by the complete randomness, sense making of Waiting for Godot, which won a Nobel Prize in literature. I started studying it to kind of figure out how we're going to win the Nobel Prize in that area, because he has to be using the notion in some way. And I found out kind of where. So we will be sublating him, but also, Peter Pan here to give an ode to maybe Disney, despite all the trauma that has gone on there. It's an ode to trying to find the ideal in the world, but we're going to be doing it a little bit more wisely and not just in the myth mode. Number three, this is for literally everybody around the world. This is, I think, in a region that is maybe not as wealthy as some of the G20 nations. But there's going to be, if we're doing this right and nobody gets left behind, billions of people are going to have their own column, and everybody's going to be treated like they're essential, they're significant. Every category matters to every person. So the new education system won't be this sort of, like they're trying to be super efficient and like, mash people together with different learning abilities, and people get left behind, and everybody's going to gain a certain level of mastery at a level that means something to them. So the synchronicity document is going to be upgraded in terms of the new citizen database of this new spirit. And as our knowledge grows, as the encyclopedia grows vertically, that's our knowledge of each person. Each person in the breadth will also learn it. So you get breadth and you get depth. So that's the true profoundness of the technologies being wrapped in this, history being wrapped in this, modern research being wrapped up in this, human beings being wrapped in this, education process itself, human dignity. It's all now in one kind of system that will eventually be turned into an app that'll be easier to use than a spreadsheet. But for now, this is a tremendous synthesis and concretization of what we're trying to do in a bunch of abstract institutions that are trying to work together under this profit maximizing that is supposed to be this idea, the surplus value coming into reality. Now we have a much clearer understanding what's going on and putting it all into one system where everybody is essential. This gets to sort of the last part of the talk. The truth speaks for itself. When you get to this self-determining coherence, the ineffable speaking itself through us, everybody's important in this universal. The universal has a duty to the individual has a duty to the state. And self-recognition is what makes that possible in a higher spirit. Not just a spirit of faith, but actually you can think it for yourself and be critical if it's not working for you. This is the way we end all the abuse that was happening in the church and all these places that treated God as an indeterminate beyond that you couldn't know scientifically. You had to use an authority to mediate, and that's where all the abuse happened. So we're solving that problem, we're solving that issue, and we're returning the church to its proper place, what it's supposed to really be, which is the center of divine science. Same with modern institutions, we're just doing the theory of everything, bringing all the departments into one universal philosophy, which includes politics. It's supposed to make society better. So our ivory tower philosophers are going to be protected and allowed to go into politics and back and forth, and it won't taint the truth of the science because it's all science. And we have this meta process very clear in Hegel's dialectic and science of logic. So we're going to bring it back to the Nobel Prizes as the universal self-recognition process in every person, so they feel a part of not just supporting the researchers doing it, but that they're right along with everyone. You go to work and you sweep the floors, you come home, you get the updates, you see what happened. All these paywalls and all these journals that keep all the research away from people, we're going to make it real time, because one of the criterions of a flow game is immediate feedback. So we're going to start our own journal of genuine philosophy that's going to go to all the other journals, and whatever money we raise, we're just going to pay for the paywall, and we're just going to start sharing it with everybody. So if you believe in that, please start supporting and working on the synchronicity document with your expertise, maybe giving a gift to the GoFundMe, maybe telling another person in that new sublative way of conversation and overcoming double binds with them. There's many ways that you can participate in that we're going to talk about to generate this inwardness, this inward connection that is necessary for that feeling, that squishy stuff that is the point of all this material coordination. And if you look, even our words, some of our most profound words have this inwardness already in it. So intimacy, intermediation, interrelation. I'm not so sure about inshallah, but I thought it was a nice way to do a justification to balance the Christian, like a lot of our sessions were Christian focused because Hegel was Christian focused, but he was actually a genuine philosopher, as we know, but he stopped it at that mode, probably because he didn't know a lot maybe about Islam, because the libraries weren't as developed, they weren't as concrete as they are now. There was no Wikipedia back then. So in some way, we're more powerful than Hegel that way. But inshallah, it just means, I think blessedness or peace be with you, or may it be, actually, I think it means may it be in the truth. And then inspiration. We have to inspire people to want to belong to this spirit. And that's what I'm hoping to do with these sessions of spirit over the last few months. So this is how we're going to welcome God on earth through the new ontological proof and the new way of science on the concrete whole, the new theory of everything. Welcome to the absolute on earth. That's the secular way of talking about it. Welcome to a new world spirit. You are part of it. You are absolute spirit. And I'm going to end with a quote that I found quite inspirational about what sublation feels like in history and to ourselves when we're dawning upon a new realization of a better world. He goes, "For the rest, it is not difficult to see that our epoch is a birth time and a period of transition. The spirit of man has broke with the older order of things hitherto prevailing and with the old ways of thinking, and is in the mind to let them all sink into the depths of the past and to set about its own transformation. It is indeed never at rest, but carried along the stream of progress ever onward. But it is here, as in the case of the birth of a child, after a long period of nutrition in silence, the continuity of the gradual growth in size and of quantitative change is suddenly cut short by the first breath drawn. There is a break in the process, a qualitative change, and a child is born. In like manner, the spirit of the time, growing slowly and quietly ripe for the new form it is to assume, disintegrates one fragment after another of the structure of its previous world. That it is tottering to its fall is indicated only by the symptoms here and there. Frivolity and again ennui, which are spreading in the established order of things, the undefined foreboding of something unknown, all these betoken that there is something else approaching. This gradual crumbling to pieces, which did not alter the general look and aspect of the whole, is interrupted by the sunrise, which, in a flash and at a single stroke, brings to view the form and structure of the new world. That's from Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, and that's what I hope we achieve with these sessions of spirit and the goodness that hopefully comes out in you as you achieve the ideal that Hegel put in his Encyclopedia of Philosophical Science and in his Philosophy of Wisdom. If you are inspired, there are a tremendous amount of practical spirit suggestions we built during the sessions for this peaceful revolution. It's a peaceful revolution because we are operating sublation. If you do not understand and you think this is a huge mistake, that's part of sublation. The first negation can be said on Hegelians who want to change the world. We'll try and answer every real question because we want to make it determinate. If you are interested in finding out where your wisdom is based on our standard and our understanding, and you trust us, you can take the wisdom quiz. And there's about 26 dialectics we check to see if you know how to sublate them. And then we show and educate where you are, how to sublate them. If you want to already apply your knowledge as a philosopher, as somebody who knows how to sublate or has an open mind to do that, you can go to the synchronicity documents and start contributing your knowledge to help show how your favorite philosopher sublates into the new Encyclopedia of the Philosophical Sciences, find the right order of things in this new dawn of knowledge and wisdom. If you're already involved in industry and you're a philosopher working on particular technologies, whether in a corporation or as a startup or wherever you are, and you feel like there's a lack of wisdom, you can start joining our labs. We're going to start our own CRISPR labs, our own artificial intelligence labs, by sublating with the experts already in the field, but under this new model of knowledge, it's more complete. You can use the 16 passive Parmenides to double check what kind of conversations you're having so that you're actually sublating with people and bringing them in ideally in a process of self-recognition that they can know, rather than abstractly negating them and actually creating a reputation that's going to push people away from the spirit because we're distorting the image of it because somebody doesn't know how to sublate. Our representatives will have to know how to sublate so that they represent the true process that Hegel was talking about, the true blessedness of conversing, the profoundness of just speech, you know, we're the inanimate subject speaking ourselves. And then we're actually going to try and spread the wisdom survey, which means more than just philosophy, all around the world, and figure out where most people are and where we need to start sublating the soonest to have the biggest effect. I'm doing this as sort of a spectator sport, as sublating instead of just debating. If anybody sends anybody to my live streams, I will try and sublate with them and then try and add them as a live sublation in the spirit broadcast. I call it the worldwide spirit broadcast. That's what that open broadcast part was about. I got quite a few already going and more coming up. Of course, we talk about the ideal state, how we're going to have to start building constitutions off of this, the legal system, getting past the stereotypes of Hegel. So I give you a bunch of quotes on how to talk to people scholarly about getting past the slaughter bench of history, because there's going to be a lot of people who are going to negate you, thinking they're more realistic and philosophical than you. But no, Hegel has both moments, the negative and the positive. Then, of course, there's the universal form of reason itself, the living syllogism, which I try and map out in the way Hegel said concretely, and then applying this to the divine texts, mega studies. If you want to participate in these, you can start adding verses that you think are important, but we are going to go day by day, chronologically through all of them, beginning to end, as much as we can. And if your divine text is missing here, just tell us and we'll add it. Then, of course, if you want to be a part of the media and help make this station even better, you can help me make the programs, help me update the statistics, stuff like that. Get on Restream, maybe help buy some more accounts so we can just have one master place to coordinate all the streams so that they stay up 24/7. If you want to work on the Nobel Prizes directly, if you're a scholar in a certain field of medicine, physics, and you have knowledge that can help us sublate the cutting edge. So whatever's happening at the cutting edge in each field, we're just going to put it into the syllogism and put it in the universal form of logic and leapfrog ahead of the researchers that are already doing it. But why leapfrog when we can just sublate and incorporate them, you know? And then we're going to universalize these prizes and start sharing the money in terms of rebuilding a new state like that Venus Project or Buckminster Fuller's Planet Earth. We're going to take that money and start sharing it as this new global GDP well-being model in the New World Spirit, so that everybody's life areas are satisfied comprehensively. And if you are having trouble participating in philosophy because you just have no time, your energy is being drained because you're in a poverty trap, or you're being exploited by some abstraction in an institution, or we don't understand your mental processes and we're trying to put you in a box, we'll try and release that and satisfy and support you tangibly in all these life areas so that you can start participating in the global game meaningfully at any level, janitor, whatever you want to do. We're going to try and meet you there. So if you need help, reach out to us. We will try and help. Because a lot of people don't have time to do the wisdom quiz or to learn, right? So that's the first step, and we have to make it easy for people to do that, practically speaking. And so this concludes the end in terms of the theoretical spirit that we talked about in the sessions of spirit, but also in terms of the practical options you now have to continue. But this is like any dialectic, the end is just a new beginning. Starting next week on August 23rd, I will be continuing this curriculum of spirit more systematically in an actual curriculum style, where I'm just going to start teaching the encyclopedia of the philosophical sciences directly every day, broadcast them on the stations as part of the outreach, but also putting them on YouTube as recorded lectures, I guess you could call them, or participatory lectures, make them more, more enjoyable in terms of participation. But I will start teaching the history of philosophy and the science of logic at the same time, passage by passage, because they're correlate, and putting those on YouTube to start garnering more respect from the Hegelian scholars around the world that I really do understand Hegel, and probably better than anybody else in the world, at least in the total. Some philosophers know more in specific sections than I do, but in terms of the whole concreteness that we need to create a new world spirit, I think we're on the right path. And this teaching of it, you are welcome to join and help spread the word of as it starts making more and more sense to you as well, just like it did for me, because you are a self-determining agent of world history. So that is basically the end of the sessions. You can read this quote if you would like. It's a final quote to allow you to determine for yourself what you want to participate in. But if you want to join the discussions right now, please do. I will look forward to chatting with you in the Zoom room. Until then, I hope you guys look over the sessions and find them useful, share them as much as you can. And most of all, stay loving, stay wise, stay sublating, and stay genuinely free.
Thank you.